Right, friends, Thailand is getting serious, and I mean really serious. Things that nobody cared about for years, things people just brushed off, are now leading straight to deportation, hefty fines, and a permanent spot on the blacklist. So, in this video, I'm going to walk you through what's actually been happening these past few weeks. The stuff that's suddenly become important. And trust me, it's a lot. And here's the part that really matters. This isn't just hitting criminals. It's hitting completely ordinary tourists and expats too. People who simply relied on old information, on things they heard from a friend of a friend, or on rules that used to apply but don't anymore. So, in this video, I'm going to break down exactly which areas the authorities are currently cracking down on hardest, and more importantly, how you can avoid making the same mistakes that are getting other people in serious trouble. But first, here's a number that should get your attention. Between January and May of this year, more than 14,000 overstayers and illegal workers were arrested and processed for deportation. And that's just one part of the picture. In this video, you'll learn the major areas where Thailand is watching foreigners especially closely right now, and where the country is coming down the hardest. Let's get into it, friends. Now, before we dive into the immigration side of things, I want to flag something else that's just happened, because it's genuinely significant, and it's connected to the same overall mood in the country right now. Thailand has suspended the issuing of new gun licenses. This came right after a school shooting in which a 14-year-old boy killed 8 people, and the Prime Minister moved fast, ordering a temporary halt on permits to buy, own, or carry firearms while the government works on tougher gun laws. Alongside that, the scheme that lets certain public officials buy discounted guns has also been suspended, and there are plans now for an amnesty period, where people can hand in illegal firearms without facing penalties for having owned them in the first place. To put the scale of this in perspective, Thailand has around 10 million civilian-owned firearms in circulation, and more than 4 million of those are believed to be completely unregistered, meaning nobody in government actually knows who holds them or where they are right now. Mass shootings are still far less common here than in a country like the United States, but after a string of deadly incidents in recent years, the government is clearly moving fast now to tighten access. And this particular tragedy appears to have been the tipping point that finally pushed policy from talk into action. I mention this because it's really part of the same bigger picture we're covering in this video. A government that spent years being fairly relaxed about enforcement and is now moving hard and moving fast, across multiple fronts at once, not just immigration. So keep that context in mind as we go through the rest of this. But before we dive into the immigration details, one important point I want to make clear. I'm not trying to scare anyone here. In my eyes, Thailand is still one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and that hasn't changed. But if you're vacationing here or living here, you need to understand that a lot of these laws are now being enforced far more strictly than they were even just a couple of years ago. And that's really the core of the problem. So many people still rely on that old line, "Oh, everybody does this here. It's not a big deal." And honestly, that kind of thinking can get seriously expensive these days. Thai immigration is actually running with a slogan right now that sums up the whole mood. No entry, no stay, no escape. In other words, you don't get in, you can't stay, and you won't get away from us. That's the message. Under the current government, led by Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul, Thailand is running a real hardline campaign against foreigners who break the law or who are staying here illegally. And the numbers back that up. In just the first 5 months of this year alone, immigration officers refused entry to 29,490 foreign nationals. On top of that, the Immigration Bureau now maintains a screening blacklist of more than 169,500 names in its apps system, which flags high-risk travelers before they even board a flight to Thailand. That's not a rumor, friends. That's the official figure, and it's worth sitting with for a second, because that's an enormous list, and it keeps growing every single week. And it doesn't stop at the border. Just weeks ago, on July 14th, the cabinet approved a sweeping overhaul of the deportation process itself. Right now, Thailand technically has the power to deport people, but the actual removal process runs through decades-old immigration law from 1979 that was never built for this. That's changing. Under the new framework, the government gets a single, unified deportation system for the first time, one designed to standardize procedures, cut delays, and move much faster than what came before. First, let me break down exactly what falls under this new deportation framework, because it's more detailed than people realize. The regulation lays out 6 specific categories that can trigger removal. Illegal entry, which is straightforward. Overstaying your permitted time. Violating the conditions of your permission to remain, meaning doing something your visa doesn't actually allow. Unlawful employment, working without the right permit, or working in a job foreigners aren't allowed to hold at all. Illegal business operations, running a company or venture that breaches the Foreign Business Act. And finally, forging, or using forged government documents. On top of those 6 categories, anyone convicted of a criminal offense, carrying a prison sentence of 3 years or more, can also become liable for deportation once they're released, and that liability extends beyond just the main offender too. It can reach people who instigated the offense or who supported it in some way, which is a broader net than most people assume. Practically speaking, that means someone who merely helped arrange or fund an offense, without directly committing it themselves, can still find themselves facing removal once the case concludes, which is a level of exposure a lot of long-term residents haven't fully considered. And here's the part that should really get your attention. The new rules don't just cover those 6 categories. They also give the government the authority to deport a foreigner if their continued presence is considered contrary to public order, public morality, or what officials describe as Thai social norms. That's a much broader standard than what existed before, and it's deliberately written that way. There's also a change to how deportations get paid for. Under the old system, deportees were supposed to leave Thailand the same way they entered, and airlines were often left holding the bill for transport. In practice, that meant a lot of orders simply never got carried out, because nobody could cover the cost, and people ended up sitting in immigration detention for months, sometimes longer, waiting for a resolution that never quite came. Under the new rules, the Thai state can now finance deportations directly, which officials say is actually cheaper than keeping someone in detention indefinitely while the paperwork drags on. There's also a new coordination requirement between prisons and immigration, meaning any foreigner finishing a jail sentence now gets flagged to the Interior Ministry before release, not after. So a deportation order can already be waiting the moment they walk out the door. Practically speaking, that closes a gap that used to let some people simply disappear into the country after finishing their sentence. And just this month, a deputy interior minister publicly warned foreigners breaking the law here, in blunt terms, telling them plainly that this is Thai territory and Thai rules apply. That's not just rhetoric anymore, friends. It's now backed by actual legal machinery, a funding mechanism, and an administrative process that didn't exist a year ago. Taken together, these changes mean the gap between committing an offense and actually facing consequences for it has gotten dramatically shorter than it used to be. And that's really the single biggest shift underneath everything else in this video. So it's worth knowing exactly what can land you on that blacklist, or get you funneled into this fast-track deportation process. And the very first point on this list is actually the reason a lot of people are currently selling off their property here. Yes, one of the biggest topics right now involves what are called illegal nominee structures. A lot of foreigners own property here through exactly this kind of setup, meaning a Thai national or a Thai registered company holds the land or the majority shareholding on paper, while the actual money and control sit with the foreigner behind the scenes. And here's the uncomfortable part. In some cases, these illegal structures were actually recommended by law firms themselves, firms that were happy to set up the paperwork and collect a fee, without necessarily walking the client through the real legal exposure involved. Some of these firms marketed the arrangement almost casually, as a routine service rather than a genuine legal risk, which is part of why so many otherwise cautious people ended up going along with it. But now the authorities are taking a much closer look at all of it, and it's spreading fast. Just this month, the crackdown on foreign nominee companies moved into Krabi, where more than 1,000 firms have already been flagged and placed on a watch list for investigation. That's not a small provincial sweep, friends. That's over 1,000 companies in a single province alone, and it tells you how seriously this is being taken right now. I know people who are selling their property right now simply because they don't want to take on that risk anymore. And you're also hearing that expensive villas out on Koh Samui or Koh Phangan are suddenly available for better prices than usual. Now, why do you think that is? You're also hearing that some people have gone back to their home countries for what they're calling an extended vacation, basically waiting to see how it plays out before deciding whether to sell, restructure, or just wait for the wave to pass. This whole crackdown really started on Koh Samui and Koh Phangan, but it's since spread to Pattaya, Phuket, and now Krabi as well. Checks are happening everywhere. But what's interesting is that, at least in this first wave, the focus isn't really on individual homeowners. It's more about catching the people running this on a larger scale, the ones buying up multiple properties this way, and then renting them out as a business. And obviously, this can escalate all the way to outright seizure of the property. If you're unlucky, you could end up with absolutely nothing. Or it could end in a forced auction, where you'd only recover a tiny fraction of what the property is actually worth. Land seized this way doesn't just get quietly returned either. So the financial hit for someone caught in a large-scale nominee operation can be devastating. It's worth understanding why this workaround exists in the first place, because it explains why so many people got pulled into it without necessarily realizing the risk. Foreigners can legally own a condominium unit outright in their own name, provided the building keeps at least 51% of its units under Thai ownership. That part has never been the issue. Land itself is the problem, since foreign nationals simply cannot own land directly under Thai law outside of a handful of narrow, high-investment exceptions that barely apply to ordinary expats. The legitimate route around that is a long-term lease, typically structured in 30-year terms, which is completely legal and doesn't involve hiding anyone's name behind a company. The nominee structure exists because some people wanted outright ownership of land rather than a lease, and that's exactly the shortcut regulators are now closing in on. Now, it's important to say, not every company set up this way is automatically illegal. So if you own a restaurant in Thailand, for example, or really any legitimate registered business, you can absolutely still purchase land under that company's name. That's not a problem at all, provided the company is genuinely operating, has real Thai shareholders with real capital contributions, and isn't just a shell built purely to hold land for a foreigner who has no actual involvement in the business. The line investigators are drawing right now really comes down to substance versus paperwork. A company with real staff, real revenue, and real Thai partners actively involved in running it looks completely different on paper from a company that exists purely so a foreigner's name never has to appear on a land title. This particular issue doesn't really affect your average tourist, but the next point definitely does. Alright, the next topic is vapes. And yes, vapes are illegal in Thailand. Most people have heard this by now, but a lot of them still think, everyone does it. It's not really a big deal. And that, friends, is a dangerous assumption, and one that can get very expensive very quickly. The authorities have gotten noticeably tougher on this than they used to be, especially outside of the nightlife areas and during general police checks. This can turn into a costly situation fast. We're talking fines of up to 30,000 baht, and depending on the circumstances, that can come bundled with other charges too, particularly if the device turns out to be part of a larger seizure. But there's actually a second layer to this problem that a lot of people don't think about. No matter how good the packaging looks, no matter how legit the device looks, a huge number of these vapes come from illegal production operations, which means they're essentially counterfeit products. Nobody really knows what's actually inside them. What chemicals, what ingredients, nothing, and that's honestly the bigger risk here, beyond just the legal one. In fact, just weeks ago, authorities raided a massive illegal vape production facility just outside of Pattaya, and we're talking about a large-scale operation here. They were mainly producing these MB9K devices, the 9K referring to roughly 9,000 puffs per unit. And these are exactly the kind of vapes you see being sold all over Pattaya, out of illegal street carts or at random night markets, often marketed with flashy flavors aimed squarely at younger buyers and tourists who don't know any better. Seizures like that one tend to involve thousands of finished units at a time, along with raw liquid concentrate, empty cartridges, and packaging designed to imitate legitimate overseas brands closely enough to fool a casual buyer. So here's my honest recommendation. Just stay away from that stuff entirely. It's not worth the risk, legally or health-wise. And if you think this topic is already getting complicated, just wait. The next point is even messier. Honestly, there's almost no topic that causes more confusion right now than cannabis. The rules have been changed and adjusted so many times, and it's still not settled. It's still very much in flux, and there's ongoing talk in government circles about reclassifying cannabis back toward a stricter narcotics category, which would be an even bigger shift than what's already happened. That constant back and forth is exactly why so many visitors assume, well, it must be legal since I can just buy it right there on the street. That assumption, friends, is exactly where the problem lies. If you get stopped during a routine check, and this is happening more and more often now, whether it's a general ID check, a helmet check, whatever it might be, the officers will often look through your bag too. And if it turns out you don't meet the legal requirements, like actually having a prescription, which is currently what's required, that can turn into a genuinely serious situation. We're talking about fines of up to 25,000 baht. And yes, plenty of shops are still openly operating and selling it without any issue at all. But here's the thing to understand. In Thailand, the law is one thing, and what actually happens on the street is another thing entirely. Just because something functions a certain way out on the street doesn't mean that's how it works if you get stopped by police and they search your bag. You can absolutely still find yourself in a stressful situation. Officially, you do need that prescription, and on top of that, consuming it in public is banned altogether. The only place it's actually allowed is in a private space, and that's important to understand. Dispensaries themselves are also facing more scrutiny now too, with authorities checking whether shops are actually operating with proper licenses, proper record keeping, and proper age verification, rather than just assuming a storefront means everything's above board. Some provinces have also started restricting operating hours and proximity to schools and temples, which tells you the direction this is heading in even before any national reclassification happens. So please do your research and find out exactly where things currently stand, because this situation shifts almost week to week, and honestly, what's true today could be outdated by the time you watch this video. Up to this point, we've mostly been talking about things you own or possess. Now let's move into something that can actually cost people their entire stay in the country. Real trouble, real fines, and a whole lot of stress. And this right here is exactly why it pays to stay up to date on all of this. So friends, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. It costs you absolutely nothing. And while you're at it, hit that notification bell too, so you'll get notified whenever I put out a new video. That way, you'll never miss anything important. Alright, let's keep going. Thailand is currently cracking down hard on illegal employment of foreigners, and this is especially true within the tourism sector. That includes things like working as a tour guide, running an unlicensed travel agency, or doing other jobs directly tied to tourism. And here's an example a lot of you will recognize. A huge number of Westerners work in bars here as bar managers. It's a role that's often preferred, honestly, because of reliability, and because you can communicate easily with customers if there's ever an issue, since you share a similar culture and language. But the problem is, most of these people working in the smaller bars don't actually have a work permit. That's because work permits are mainly issued to people working at the larger clubs, if you're a manager there. So what a lot of people try to do is first get a foot in the door at one of the bigger clubs, secure that work permit, and from there, technically, they're able to work anywhere. It's a workaround that's been common knowledge in the expat community for years, and it's precisely the kind of common knowledge that's now getting a lot more dangerous to act on. Now the penalties here are severe, immediate deportation, and on top of that, employers get hit hard too, facing fines of 200,000 baht per illegal employee, which is a serious deterrent for bar owners and venue managers who might otherwise be tempted to look the other way. It's also worth remembering that the list of jobs foreigners simply cannot legally hold in Thailand is long, and it leans heavily toward manual trades, agriculture, construction, driving for hire, and beauty or hairdressing services. If your income doesn't come from an approved category or from work performed for a company based outside the country, you're in a legal grey zone at best. For people genuinely working online, the DTV visa remains one of the cleaner solutions available right now. It's built for digital nomads, certain skilled freelancers, and people whose income comes from clients or employers outside Thailand. And it runs for 5 years with permitted stays of up to 180 days at a time. The catch, and it's an important one, is that DTV holders still can't take on work for Thai companies. The moment your income source shifts from overseas to local, you've stepped outside what the visa actually permits, no matter how informal the arrangement feels on paper. And now that we're already talking about money and earning a living, let's move on to the next point. Not everyone runs into trouble because of some complicated legal technicality. Sometimes all it takes is disrespectful behavior or one bad decision. Drunk driving, public disturbances, or aggressive behavior can carry consequences that go well beyond just criminal charges. In some cases, they can directly affect your visa status or your right to stay in the country, and this connects directly back to that new public good and moral conduct standard the government just introduced. Behavior that never used to affect someone's visa at all can now, at least in theory, become grounds for removal, and that's a real shift in how much discretion officials have when they're deciding whether someone stays or goes. It doesn't necessarily mean a single bad night out gets you deported, but it does mean the buffer that used to exist between embarrassing and actionable has gotten a lot thinner than it used to be. There's also a related change worth flagging here too. Visa-exempt land border crossings, the kind a lot of long-term visitors used to rely on to reset their stay, are now capped at 2 entries per calendar year. Local immigration offices have been instructed to refuse extensions or cancel existing stays outright when they spot that classic pattern of repeated short border hops. So if your whole plan for staying in the country long-term was built around bouncing back and forth across a land border every couple of months, that loophole is effectively closed now, and trying it anyway is more likely to get you flagged than waved through. Officers at these crossings are also reportedly cross-referencing entry history more carefully than before, so a pattern that might have gone unnoticed a couple of years ago tends to stand out immediately now on the system. Especially in the major tourist areas, checks are happening far more often these days, and far less is being overlooked or excused than before. And as I've mentioned before, you see it in the news almost every single day now. Stories about foreigners who get drunk or behave badly in other ways. And then there's the whole social media factor to consider too. A lot of young tourists and influencers out in Pattaya, Koh Phangan, or Phuket will provoke situations on purpose, purely for the clicks and the views. Stunts on motorbikes, confrontations with locals, staged arguments, anything that generates outrage and engagement. But here's the catch. The police are watching this content too, since it's so visible and widespread, and they actually use these videos to identify people, track them down, arrest them, and deport them directly. In several cases over the past year, foreigners have been picked up within days of a viral clip surfacing, simply because the footage made identification and location almost effortless for investigators. So there's really no more room for that kind of joking around anymore, friends. None at all. Now, on the other hand, a lot of foreigners rent out their condo or apartment on Airbnb. But here's the catch. Short-term rentals are actually illegal without a hotel license, and this is being enforced really strictly right now. Technically, if you're renting out a place for less than a month at a time, you need a hotel license. And let's be honest, almost nobody actually has one of those. Buildings themselves can also face consequences here, not just individual owners, because a condominium juristic person that allows widespread short-term renting inside the building can end up facing complaints and inspections of its own. Now, here's the good news, at least for you as a visitor or a tourist. This isn't your problem. If you're the one booking an Airbnb and the host doesn't have the proper license, that's on them, not on you. As a guest, you have nothing to worry about here. The risk falls entirely on the person doing the renting out. But if you're the one who owns a property and you're the one renting it out short-term, then I'd be a lot more careful, because this is currently being watched extremely closely, right up there alongside the nominee property issue we talked about earlier. Some owners have tried getting around this by listing for slightly longer minimum stays, 31 nights instead of 30, for example. But enforcement has started looking at actual usage patterns rather than just the number printed on the listing. So that particular workaround isn't the safety net some people think it is. And the next few points we need to cover have nothing to do with housing at all. This is about organized crime. For several months now, Thailand has been ramping up its crackdown on international fraud networks, scam centers, many of which involve foreigners as well, sometimes as operators, sometimes as trafficked labor forced to work inside these compounds against their will. Now, for the average tourist or expat, what this really means is simple. Be careful. Be careful with phone calls, with text messages, with strange messages or emails you weren't expecting. Don't click on links you don't recognize. This is something that's been building in Thailand for years now, and it just keeps growing. These organized scam networks operate on a large scale, friends, and I really wouldn't underestimate it. Some of the operations broken up along the border areas have involved hundreds of workers in a single compound, running call center-style fraud aimed at victims all over the world, not just here in Thailand. I get these kinds of suspicious messages on my own phone every few days. My advice, don't respond, don't click, just delete it. Honestly, that's the safest thing you can do. And if you're ever unsure whether a message claiming to be from a bank or a government office is real, contact that organization directly through their official channel instead of replying to whatever landed in your inbox. Now, I want to switch gears here for a moment, friends, because there's one more topic that comes up constantly, especially from anyone over 50 living here long-term, and that's medication. What you can bring into Thailand, what you can't, and what actually happens if you get it wrong. This one matters, because unlike vapes or cannabis, this isn't something people go looking for trouble with. It usually just catches people off guard. Thailand splits medication into a few distinct legal categories, and each one comes with its own set of rules. The first category covers general prescription medicine that isn't considered controlled. things like antibiotics, certain blood pressure medications, insulin, or birth control. These are generally fine to bring in, provided they're in their original packaging, clearly labeled with your name, the drug name, and the dosage instructions, and you're carrying a copy of your prescription or an official letter from your doctor confirming your condition, your daily dosage, and their own credentials, alongside your passport. That applies whether you're returning from a trip home with a fresh supply, or arriving as a visitor carrying your regular medication with you. The second category is where things get more serious, and this covers narcotics and controlled painkillers, things like codeine, morphine-based medication, or oxycodone. These are allowed into the country, but only with advance approval. In practice, that means applying through the Thai FDA's online portal using the relevant import form, and you need to do that at least 2 weeks before you travel. That 2-week window matters, friends, because it's not something you can sort out at the last minute at the airport, no matter how much you plead your case at the counter. On arrival, you're required to declare these medications through the red channel at customs, the one for goods that need to be declared, rather than simply walking through without saying anything. Skipping that declaration, even accidentally, out of habit, or because you forgot the medication was in your bag, is treated the same as trying to conceal it, so it's worth building that step into your routine every single time you travel. Then there's a third group, which includes psychotropic substances, things like diazepam, lorazepam, and a range of common sleeping tablets. You can bring these in without applying for that advance FDA permit, but only if you're carrying proper medical documentation with you. That means your name and address, your diagnosed condition, the exact medication and dosage, the medical reasoning behind it, and the total quantity you're bringing. And this next part is genuinely important, because it trips people up constantly. The standard allowance is a 30-day supply. You can sometimes bring in up to 60 or 90 days worth, but that depends entirely on your prescribed dosage. If your prescription is 1 tablet a day, you're limited to 30 tablets, not 60, because 60 would exceed what a 30-day supply actually looks like at that dosage. People assume a bigger number automatically means a bigger allowance, and that's simply not how the calculation works. One question that comes up constantly is whether you can bring medication into Thailand on behalf of someone else, a friend, a partner, a family member. And the answer is simply no. The prescription belongs to the person it was written for, at that dosage, for that specific condition. If you're the one physically carrying someone else's controlled medication across the border, you personally become the one committing the offense, regardless of your intentions. So don't do it, even if it feels like a harmless favor. The penalties here scale with how far outside the rules you fall. If you're carrying slightly more than your allowance, or your paperwork isn't quite complete, the usual outcome is confiscation and a formal warning. But if you're carrying an excessive amount, or carrying medication that isn't prescribed to you at all, that becomes a criminal importation matter, and it's dealt with accordingly. That can mean criminal court proceedings, deportation, being placed on the immigration blacklist, and depending on severity, fines and prison time. It's a far bigger consequence than most people expect from something as ordinary as bringing your own medicine cabinet with you. So here's the practical takeaway on this one, friends. A lot of us, especially as we get a bit older, genuinely need regular medication, and that's completely normal. Sometimes it's easier to source locally through a Thai hospital or pharmacy, instead of importing it at all. And honestly, a lot of long-term expats end up doing exactly that, once they realize how straightforward local prescriptions can be here. But if you do need to bring something in, and it falls into one of the controlled categories, don't guess. Check the requirements, apply for the FDA permit if it's needed, and travel with your documentation in order. It's a straightforward process once you know the steps, and it's a lot less hassle than dealing with the alternative. A related point worth mentioning is that requirements can also depend on the specific formulation and strength of a medication, not just the general drug name. So 2 people taking what sounds like the same medicine at different doses might technically fall under different rules. Pharmacies back home don't always label things the way Thai customs expects either. So a medication that looks perfectly ordinary on a home country label can still raise questions here if the packaging doesn't clearly show your name, the dosage, and the drug name together. If you're not sure which category something falls into, a quick check with a Thai law firm that handles these cases, or directly with the FDA import desk, costs you very little time compared to sorting out a mess at the airport. The one rule to never break here is simple. Never carry medication into the country for somebody else. It only takes one bag check, one immigration stop, to turn a small favor into a serious legal problem. And unlike a lot of the other issues we've covered in this video, This is one where good intentions genuinely don't count for much once customs has your bag open on the table. If there's one thing that's probably become clear to you throughout this whole video, it's probably this. A lot of these rules aren't actually brand new. They didn't just appear out of nowhere yesterday. The real difference right now is simply that they're being enforced far more consistently, especially in the tourist areas, than they ever were before. And the enforcement itself now has real numbers behind it. Immigration figures show over 190 targeted operations carried out nationwide this year, with Chonburi province, meaning Pattaya, leading the country with roughly 147 of those raids alone. On top of that, more than 660 fraudulent education visas were revoked in the first 5 months of the year, cases involving foreigners using student status as a workaround to stay in the country illegally. Add the new gun licensing suspension into that picture too, and what you're really looking at is a government moving on several fronts at once. Immigration, weapons, public morality, all pointed in the same tighter, stricter direction. None of these moves are happening in isolation, and that pattern itself is worth paying attention to, because it tells you this isn't a temporary crackdown that quietly fades out in a few months. It looks a lot more like a genuine, sustained shift in how the country is choosing to govern itself going forward. If you stay informed, and you keep in mind everything I've walked you through in this video, you honestly shouldn't run into any real problems here in Thailand. But if you rely on outdated stories or half-truths you picked up somewhere, you can very quickly find yourself in some uncomfortable situations right now, simply because enforcement is so much stricter than it used to be, and now backed by a faster, government-funded deportation system that didn't exist even a year ago. And that's exactly why it's so important to actually know what's going on, not what used to be true 2 or 3 years back, but what's actually true today. The points I've covered in this video are, right now, the major areas where Thailand is watching foreigners especially closely, and that's something you should absolutely be aware of. So it really does pay off to stay up to date. And if you take one thing away from this video, beyond the individual rules themselves, let it be this. The days of assuming a law simply won't be enforced because it never used to be, are genuinely over. Whether it's property, vapes, cannabis, work permits, short-term rentals, medication, or now even firearms, the pattern across every single one of these topics is the same. Rules that existed quietly on paper for years are now being applied with real resources, real manpower, and real political will behind them. That's not something you can out-argue at a checkpoint, and it's not something a friend of a friend's outdated advice is going to protect you from. So guys, subscribe to my channel, and now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know how you feel about all of this. Do you think Thailand is being too strict here? Do you think they're overdoing it a bit? Or do you think, honestly, this is exactly the right approach? Let me know, friends. And especially let me know if you've got any information of your own, or if you personally know people who've been affected by any of this. Drop it in the comments. This is Expat Life in Asia, and I'll see you in the next video.